Part 1. Why Society Rejects Truly Exceptional People. We live in an age where the idea of being exceptional is celebrated everywhere. Social media is flooded with influencers preaching self-improvement, unlocking potential, and becoming a master of some craft. But there's a strange paradox here. While society talks endlessly about becoming the best version of yourself, it often recoils when it encounters the truly exceptional. Why is that? Why does society in many ways reject genuine brilliance, true individuality, or the person who dares to think deeply, differently, or dangerously? That's the question we're going to explore today. And to answer it, we'll have to lean heavily on one of the greatest pessimists in philosophy, Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer once remarked, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." It's a brilliant observation, because while we like to think we admire genius, most of the time we don't. We admire competence. We reward conformity. True genius unsettles us. It challenges our beliefs, makes us question the obvious, and exposes the cracks in our illusions. You see, society doesn't function by elevating individuals who challenge the consensus. It functions by rewarding those who maintain it. Philosophers call this social cohesion, the psychological glue that binds groups together. And anyone who threatens that glue, whether it's through radical ideas, disturbing truths, or simply refusing to play the cultural game, is often pushed aside, or worse, vilified. We can think of it this way. Imagine society as a beautifully painted wall. Most people are busy trying to contribute to that wall, to add their own careful strokes. But the philosopher, the true intellectual, is the one standing back and asking, wait, why this wall? Why paint it at all? What lies behind it? And that's uncomfortable for those still holding paintbrushes. But it's not just about discomfort. There's a deeper mechanism at play here, one Schopenhauer understood perfectly. He saw the world through what he called the will, a kind of blind, irrational force driving all existence. And when someone genuinely intelligent looks at the world, they often see how much of life is governed by petty desires, illusions, and self-deceptions. Most people don't want to see that. They want comfort, they want certainty, and above all, they want validation. This is why society tends to tolerate intelligence, but reject genius. Intelligence makes us better at the existing game. Genius tries to rewrite the rules of the game entirely. And when someone comes along with a truly original thought, something that breaks with convention, they don't just pose a threat intellectually, they pose a threat psychologically. It's not just, I disagree with you. It's, you are shaking the very ground I stand on. Part 2. The comfort of mediocrity and the threat of the outsider. Now let's go deeper into this psychological tension. Why exactly does true genius disturb people? It's not just about intellectual disagreement. It's something far more personal, something tied to identity itself. Most people build their sense of self around what philosophers call the nomos, the shared customs, rules, and unspoken agreements of a particular society. This nomos gives life structure. It tells us what's acceptable, what's valuable, and, most importantly, what's normal. And once you start questioning that foundation, you're not just presenting new ideas. You're, in effect, pulling the rug out from under people's entire worldview. This is why mediocrity feels so safe. Mediocrity means playing within the lines, obeying the nomos, and affirming the established order. Society doesn't just tolerate mediocrity, it actively celebrates it. Not because people want to be mediocre, but because mediocrity is predictable. It's familiar. It doesn't provoke existential anxiety. But the genius, the radical thinker, the outsider, they threaten that sense of comfort. They don't just present alternative ideas. They make you question whether the whole system of ideas you've accepted is even valid at all. Think about Socrates, one of the original examples of this tension. Socrates didn't just ask people philosophical questions. He interrogated their deepest assumptions. He exposed ignorance not by being cruel, but by being honest. And what was the reward for this radical honesty? Execution. Condemned for corrupting the youth and impiety, Socrates stood as living proof of Schopenhauer's insight. Society does not like those who see what others cannot. But it's not just ancient history. The mechanism repeats itself over and over again. Friedrich Nietzsche, another philosopher heavily influenced by Schopenhauer, described this exact social reflex as ressentiment. When people feel inferior or exposed by someone else's brilliance, instead of admitting their discomfort, they turn that discomfort into moral judgment. That person isn't just smart, they're arrogant, they're dangerous, they're immoral. It's a psychological defense. If I can frame the outsider as bad, then I don't have to deal with the uncomfortable truth they're presenting. And in doing so, I can retreat into the warm embrace of mediocrity without guilt. And here's the twist. Most of this happens unconsciously. People don't usually think to themselves, I dislike this person because they're more insightful than me. No, the human mind works in subtler ways. It invents justifications. It protects the ego with clever little rationalizations. What we're really talking about here is not just intellectual rejection, but ontological anxiety, a threat to someone's very sense of being. And society, like any organism, instinctively protects itself from what threatens its stability. Part 3. Nietzsche, ressentiment, and the herd instinct. This brings us to one of the most important philosophical concepts in understanding society's rejection of the truly intelligent. Nietzsche's idea of ressentiment. Nietzsche used this term to describe a deep, festering resentment that builds in those who feel powerless or inferior. But instead of confronting that feeling directly, they twist it into a kind of moral superiority. Think of it this way. When someone encounters an individual whose intelligence, creativity, or insight surpasses their own, they face a choice. They can either humbly admit, this person sees something I don't. Maybe I have something to learn. Or they can flip the narrative entirely. They can tell themselves, this person is weird. They're dangerous. They don't follow the rules for a reason. They're probably broken in some way. This is ressentiment in action. And once that mechanism kicks in, it tends to spread. People love validation from others, especially when they feel threatened. If one person in a group begins whispering about the danger of an outsider, others quickly join in. Not always out of malice, but because it makes them feel secure again. The individual, the outsider, the exceptional, is isolated, not always by open violence, but by quiet exclusion, ridicule, and suspicion. Nietzsche saw this as the root of what he called slave morality. In contrast to master morality, where values come from strength, vitality, and creative power, slave morality invents values based on resentment. The exceptional are framed as evil or immoral, not because they are, but because it makes the mediocre feel righteous. But this isn't just some philosophical abstraction. You can see it everywhere today. In workplaces, schools, social groups, when someone steps outside the accepted norms or dares to question the obvious, they often find themselves subtly sidelined. People don't need to shout at them. They just stop being invited to things. They become, slowly but surely, the other. And that brings us back to Schopenhauer's insight. Genius hits a target no one else can see. But by doing so, the genius also reveals that most people have been aiming at the wrong target their entire lives. And that revelation is unbearable for many. Schopenhauer would likely argue that this isn't going to change. Why? Because of the will. Remember, Schopenhauer didn't believe the world was governed by reason or intelligence, but by a blind, striving force he called Wille zum Leben, the will to life. The will doesn't care about truth. It cares about survival, about reproduction, about maintaining illusions that keep us psychologically comfortable. And genius doesn't serve the will. In fact, it often works against it. By exposing illusions, genius forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about existence, truths about suffering, about meaninglessness, about the absurdity of much of what we value. So what happens? The herd, the collective force of mediocrity, protects itself. And it does this by excluding those who refuse to go along with the game. Part 4. Intelligence, alienation, and the price of seeing too much. Now, let's explore the personal cost of this dynamic. What does it actually feel like to be one of those people who see the target no one else can see? The answer is isolation. And not the kind of romantic, poetic isolation people like to talk about. It's the slow, creeping realization that the very things that make you different, the things you might take pride in, also make it harder for others to relate to you. And in turn, harder for you to relate to them. It's easy to misunderstand this as arrogance, but this has nothing to do with thinking you're better than others. It's about seeing further, or deeper, or from a different angle. And often, you wish you could switch it off, just to enjoy the comfort of belonging. But once you've seen through certain illusions, you can't unsee them. Philosopher Émile Cioran once said, "Only the intelligent are truly sad." Why? Because they are burdened by the awareness of contradictions, of absurdities, of the fleeting nature of everything we call meaningful. Intelligence isn't just about IQ or solving puzzles. It's about perceiving complexity, and complexity is rarely comforting. This is why intelligent people often drift toward solitude, not necessarily because they dislike people, but because they crave conversations and relationships that match their level of insight. And in a society dominated by superficial goals, wealth, fame, status, conformity, those kinds of relationships are hard to find. But this isolation can easily turn into something darker: alienation. The German philosopher Hegel described alienation and Fremdung as the condition of being estranged not just from society, but from oneself. It's the feeling of being a stranger in your own world. Why? Because if everyone around you is playing a game you've stopped believing in, how do you continue playing along? Do you fake it? Do you pretend to laugh at the jokes that bore you? Do you engage in small talk that feels like a slow erosion of your soul? This is not arrogance. It's a kind of existential homelessness. And the paradox is that intelligence often leads not to superiority, but to humility. The more you see, the more you realize how little can truly be known, how fragile human certainty really is. But that humility itself can make you feel even more distant from a world obsessed with appearing confident, decisive, and right. Here's the cruel irony. The very people who are most equipped to help society evolve, to challenge assumptions, to build bridges toward deeper understanding, are often the ones most rejected by that very society. The herd wants comfort, not transformation, and the intelligent often become unwilling prophets, carrying insights no one asked for. Part 5. The quiet heroism of remaining awake. So what's the answer? Should the intelligent simply retreat into isolation, nursing their loneliness in silence? Should they surrender to bitterness, convinced that society will never understand them? No, that's not the way forward. Not if we want to live meaningfully. The path for the truly intelligent isn't to withdraw, but to persist, to continue thinking, creating, and speaking, even when the world misunderstands or ignores them. This persistence is not for applause. It's not to prove superiority. It's a quiet kind of heroism, the courage to remain awake in a world that prefers sleep. Think of the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, who described life as a kind of existential tension, a constant conflict between what we want to be and what the world expects us to be. He said that to truly be yourself is the greatest achievement, even if it means walking alone. And that's exactly what's at stake here: authenticity. To be intelligent is to notice not just the surface of things, but the cracks beneath the surface. It's to see how fragile social conventions are, how arbitrary many of our values can be, how constructed the games of success and failure really are. And once you see that, you can either retreat or engage. And engagement doesn't always mean arguing or trying to convince others. Often it means quietly living by your values, building a life with integrity, even if others don't notice. It means creating art, writing, building, teaching, thinking. Not because you'll be rewarded, but because it's the right thing to do. Nietzsche described this as living beyond good and evil. Not in the sense of being immoral, but in the sense of not depending on society's praise or condemnation to validate your existence. The intelligent know that real meaning comes from within, from building coherence between thought and action. But even with all this, it's important to remember, no one is completely alone. There are others who see, even if they're scattered, even if they're rare. And in the age of the internet, in a strange twist of history, many of these scattered minds are beginning to find each other. Communities of thought, creativity, philosophy. They're forming quietly, like embers in the dark. So perhaps the rejection the intelligent often face isn't the end of the story. Perhaps it's the beginning of something else, a slow, patient weaving of a different kind of society. Not a society of conformity, but one of real understanding, of depth, of honesty. In the end, the task is clear. Stay awake, stay honest, stay true, even if the world looks away. That's the burden and the beauty of true intelligence. Conclusion. The choice of the awake. This is the burden and the gift of true intelligence. To see too much, to feel too deeply, and to live slightly apart from the world. But from that distance, real beauty is born. Art, philosophy, thought, creation, all emerge from those who refuse to belong completely. If you feel part of that silent minority, if you've ever felt alone in your thoughts, know this: you're not alone. We're here, quiet, scattered, awake. If you want to continue this journey, this search for truth, for meaning, stay, join the conversation, share your thoughts in the comments, tell me your story. And if you found value here, subscribe, not for numbers, but so we don't lose each other in the noise. This isn't just a video, it's an invitation. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.